I think also too is we assume that because we did it in the past, that's the best way. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, that's the best way.
Yeah.
Like, no, that was the best way for you then, right? Which would you prefer? Would you prefer, an automobile or a horse and carriage, right? That's the past, the good old days. You know what I mean? How about we just get that carriage house put together, and we have some hay and you can go muck out the stalls, right? And you can go
Exactly.
feed your horse, right? I mean, the good old
Yep.
days.
Yep. And build a fire and
Build a
and the
fire.
outhouse.
That's
Yeah, and
right.
all that good stuff right
The
there. So
outhouse. We don't need this Zoom stuff. We'll just, we'll go by courier pigeon or Pony Express. The good old days, right?
yeah,
That's the way we used to do it.
yeah, no
Like,
doubt.
like we're stuck there, and we assume that there have been no advances. It's funny because we say things like we love change. Change is good. Like people smoke that opium pipe every 8 to 12 years in the political arena, right? Change, change, change. But the reality is, as a species, we're really resistant to change. That's the way I always done it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Give me
Yeah.
one good reason why I should change. I don't know.
Welcome to the Strength Connection Podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Krukowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us. And Geoff Neupert, it is always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for coming back.
Michael, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be on. Good to see you
Yeah.
again.
Always, absolutely. I've learned so much from you over the years from afar, the work that you did with RKC and Strong first, and then into Chasing Strength. And as I was saying, like the work that you put out on your YouTube channel, for anybody that hasn't seen it before, it's just such crystal clear, good information on strength training and fat loss, just everything, all the questions that get messed up in our heads all the time of what you should do. You do just a beautiful job of clearing out the clutter and the bullshit of it and just putting it into 8 to 10 minutes of just facts in there. And in a world where I think there's so much information out there all the time, just to have a clear voice, I always go to you for that. So I appreciate you jumping on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, absolutely. So to dive in, I messaged you about a couple different ideas, but with one of the things that I've been always curious about with people who have been in your, shoes, have gone through the program, been doing this for a long time, is just the evolution of coaching, from the early days when you got into now. I'm sure the process that you've had has changed quite a bit. So to kick it off, like, I always think, like, what were the things was there anything specific that you thought was really important when you first got into coaching that you realized is really not that important in the long run, that maybe people put too much emphasis on?
Well, I'm probably going to whack the hornet's nest here, tip over the barrel or whatever, manure. But I think that when I was younger, I focused a lot on, I don't want to say I focused a lot, but there was a large part of my training with my clients and my athletes. I was focused on flexibility work. And what I learned later on was this really not that necessary, right? So yeah, I can't tell if I can see like a puzzled look on your face, right?
That's just my look. Yeah. So
that's just your look.
That's just me taking everything in from there.
We,
say more. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we studied all kinds of stretching. There was static stretching and dynamic stretching and sport specific stretching, active stretching, right? I think that the big three were static, active, dynamic, right? And depending on what you're supposed to do, you had these different forms of stretching protocols, right? You had contract, relax, all these. I don't remember all of them, right?
Yeah.
But active, isolated stretching, just various forms of PNF stretching, which were all great at the time, right? But what I noticed is we would stretch our athletes, or we'd have our athletes stretch, or we'd have our clients stretch, or I would stretch my clients, and we'd follow these protocols, and we'd either do them at the beginning or the end or both, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. And the next time we come to do it, and there was no change in the individual, right? So what happened was it opened up a short-term window, right, of increased range of motion, or whatever you want to call it, to supposedly improve performance. And nothing ever came of it. I think the flexibility training is really important for certain sports, right? So both my kids are in gymnastics. Well, guess what? They hit extreme ranges of motion. So
Right.
their tissues and their joints need to be prepared for those extreme ranges of motion. But, most of us aren't going to do back handsprings or back walkovers on the beam or, any sort of ring work that requires, an L sit.
Right.
Right. So there's a point of diminishing returns. Right. So, and in those early days, and what I mean by early days is, so I got started training professionally in 1993. And so when I say early days, I'm talking about probably the first 7 years of my training and coaching, right? So 93 to about 2000. We didn't talk about things like mobility and restoration work. We talked about restoration work in the form of recovery work, but not restoration work the way we tend to talk about it today, or at least the way that I define it, which is basically a form of do-it-yourself physical therapy, right? So yeah, that was probably the biggest thing. And then the second biggest thing that I learned is training plans are not concrete. They're not the 10 Commandments, and they are not carved in stone, right?
Yeah.
So, in fact, many of them probably should be smashed, and part of that is because they don't fit the person that you're training. They came from a book, right? And the second thing is a lot of times, and this is related to the first part, they don't fit the person or the team that you're training, is because life gets in the way. I used to spend hours coming up with the perfect training plans. I had spreadsheets, and it's just when I think about the amount of time I spent researching training plans and customizing training plans for individual athletes and in teams, and the amount of work that I did with them, it was good. It was good training and it was good preparation, but a lot of it was wasted time, because I can think of one coach in particular, the men's basketball coach at Rutgers. He was, I think sadist would be too kind, but he would yell and scream and curse and demean his athletes if they did something wrong. And so we had this strength program, and or a conditioning program, but we'd probably chuck 2/3 of it, because he'd get mad at his players, and it was 17s time. And for those of you who don't know what 17s are, it's sideline to sideline 17 times.
Oh gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how many of those would they do? As many as he felt they should do. And what was the rest times? Always incomplete. Right. Yeah. So you've got you have an athlete who is physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, right, and can't do anything. So I mean, there were times where these guys on the team would come into the strength room, and we would turn the music up, lock the door so that the coaching staff couldn't get in. And instead of training, doing their strength workouts, they would just relax and chill out and do whatever they wanted, right? Because it was like a healing time.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It was restoration in the traditional recovery time, as opposed to, what we just talked about with the modern term restoration. So apologies in advance for the snot bubble. That's gross, Geoff.
No worries. I'm just getting over there on the other side. So
those are probably the two biggest lessons I learned, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that those things aren't important. It's just they're not as important as I thought they were.
Right. I think that last point you just put in is so powerful. It's not that they're not important, but that's one of my pet peeves that I see so much, specifically on the World Wide Web, is everybody's talking about the best way, or all you need to do, or just like these very they're speaking in extremes on this, when it's like, no, there's a time and a place for it. And the two examples you put is interesting, because one is kind of more on the science and the program side of flexibility, and the other one is really kind of the art of coaching. Right. The Mike Tyson's famous line, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Every boxer every boxer that stepped into the ring with Iron Mike had an idea of what they wanted to do. Then all of a sudden they get hit with the first juggernaut, and things start to change, from there. And, I think of it as, I'm, watching the NFL this weekend, and you see things go crazy all the time in the NFL every Sunday. And it's not that every team didn't have an expectation or plan of what they wanted to do. Right. It's just the ones that end up on the end. It's usually the ones that make the best adjustments at the end. So seeing something like that with athletes or clients, I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons, is how much, don't marry your programs from there. And it seems like it's tough too, because I think a lot of clients or a lot of people go into programs thinking that, there's a very specific way I have to do this. Have you seen that a lot with clients? Oh yeah, all the time. And I think that's for two reasons. One is
It's the expectation based on preconceived notions, right, and past histories. Well, that's probably the main thing, right? It's like, I should do this because I was an athlete in the past, and this is what I did, right? When I was 16, 19, 21, 23, this is what I did when I was fresh out of college or first in the military. And, my 3 squares a day were taken care of. And, I didn't have a wife and I didn't have children and I wasn't getting paid to work 40 hours a week, but I'm actually working 80 hours a week and I got to transport kids to practice, right? Or this is what Joey steroid user on, InstaTwit is telling me I should do, right? So it's, I don't know who said this, but maybe you can help me out here. Some philosopher said, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Right. So guys, especially, I'm not so much women, I guess probably women. I train way more guys than women, but we're constantly comparing ourselves against what we think we should do versus what we actually can do and should do. Does that make sense?
100. It's so simple to say, oh, don't compare yourself to others. I think there's a natural ingraining of us to see somebody who is amazing in the gym, or they have such graceful movements, and you look at that and be like, I want to aspire to get there. It's partly a comparison. So I think it's always interesting because I don't think comparison is necessarily so bad, like 100% bad in many ways. If you have no reference point of what to do with something and you see something that's aspiring, it can give you a little bit of fuel to test it out. But I think probably more so when you go into an action plan, that's when you want to take the comparison away and just work on what's best for you. But I mean, in the decades now that you've trained, I mean, you went from the days where there was no social media, there was not as much comparison right in your face now where you're still working. Is there a big difference that you see now from people when you talk to them, or has this always been a thing of comparison that you've seen with people?
Well, I probably didn't see it when I was younger because I had my own expectations and my own standards, which I impressed upon myself, right? Which, if I'm true and honest to myself, and in this conversation, it was probably based on others and others' achievements. So, for example, great Olympic lifters, I saw them and I modeled myself after them and wanting to attain those standards. So, I think I agree with you 100%. Not all comparisons bad all the time. It's just when you're too rigid and inflexible in your thinking, right? To see that it could be a goal or a standard, right? Or a milestone or an archetype to which to aspire, right? As opposed to, I have to be exactly that, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
So in my early days, I was a wrestler first, right? I had a running and wrestling background. And I took that into weightlifting. And so when I trained my clients, when I got done with strength and conditioning in 2000, when I left Rutgers and opened up my own business full time, I married those two, wrestling and Olympic lifting, which is how I got into kettlebell training. Right. I saw as the perfect tool to blend those two modalities or those two sports, right? And the outcomes for training for both. So that was kind of the standard that I would set to train my clients against. So if I was comparing anything, it was how strong is a weightlifter? How explosive is a weightlifter? What kind of endurance does a wrestler have? And I know I'm kind of answering your question obliquely.
Yeah.
But I think, it's also the difference between, like I mentioned, comparison, and you mentioned not bad all the time, versus standards or objectives to reach. Right?
Yeah. I remember when I was a couple years into training, this was a while ago, but a kid came to me. He was a baseball player. And I remember this so vividly. He was a third baseman, and he was a young kid, 14 years old, very uncoordinated, not very athletic, but, was interested in learning. And his dad brought me in an article of Evan Longoria, from the third baseman from the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. And he had a medicine ball workout that he was doing. And he wanted me to do this workout with his son because in his mind, well, this is what the third baseman of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays goes into. And I'm like, your son can't touch his toes. Like he can't balance on one foot. I don't think Evan's workout is going to get him into the draft yet. And, but I thought of it different. I thought of it like a little deeper, like, okay, like this guy just doesn't understand really what this is about. But it's a comparison thing of, oh, I see this marketing tool out here. This is what this guy's doing. Who knows if that's what Evan Longoria was doing? The guy's, I think naturally gifted hand-eye coordination that he can hit the ball.
He probably do pretty much anything, right? Like the strength and conditioning component was just like the cherry on top of the whole sundae, right?
And that's why I first realized that when I saw like high-level hockey players and realized like, oh, it doesn't matter what we do in the weight room with these guys. They're going to kick ass out here on the rink. Like we just need to kind of get out of the way. But it kind of goes into that comparison. It's like, yeah, okay, like this is what you think, but no, like you don't need to do what he needs to do yet. He needs to learn how to do a proper push-up from here.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, right? A lot of us see comparison and we go like for like, right? Mm-hmm. So, oh, well, he does medicine ball work. So my son has to do medicine ball work.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I'm 40, 50 years old. And this guy that, I want his body on social media. So I have to do jumping backflip box jumps to a pull-up bar. But I have a hard time getting out of this chair.
Right.
Right. So aspiration versus mimicry, right? Like maybe confusing the two in your mind.
Yeah. And probably not realizing that by just learning how to get up out of a chair a little better, you're going to feel so freaking amazing when you do that. Yeah. You don't need to look like the other guy. You're like just a step away. So just, the buy-in, absolutely. If it gets you motivated, I think that's great. Sure. So to move back to the flexibility piece on there, because I've thought that as well. As I'm almost 40 now, and I can still move pretty well. I think I'm relatively graceful, but I have felt the stiffness a little bit differently than when I was 25. And I've thought like I need to add more mobility work, when in reality, what I found is if I warm up a little bit more beforehand, that gets me right into the strength piece from there. And as long as I've stayed strength, then I've been able to do everything else. So do you think that it's oftentimes people confuse, I need to be more flexible or be a little bit more pliable, when in reality, they just need to get stronger in their movements?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. But they're also, it's both, right? It's not we like to pit one party against the other, right? Like it's either this or it's that in many cases. Why we do that, I have no idea. That's for the philosophizers out there, right? But what I've noticed is more often than not, it's and/both, right? Or it's not and or, it's both, right? And/or, it's both. Yes, you need to improve your mobility. Yes, you need to improve your strength. Will improving your strength improve your mobility? Possibly. Mm-hmm. How about probably? Not sure. Need to do an injury history, right? Need to do a training history. At my peak, getting stronger didn't make me move better. It actually made me move worse, right? So more load on the bar, reduced my range of motion, made me hurt more, increased the amount of pain I was in on a moment by moment basis, right? Even though I could measure my 5 RMs going up, my 2 RMs going up, my volume going up, took me longer to warm up, right? Right before I injured my right hip, I tore the labrum in my right hip in 2005. My warm-ups took me about 45 minutes.
Really?
Yep.
Do you question that in your head of like, maybe this is an issue that I need to warm up this long?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. But, it was the dominant training paradigm of the time, right? You need to go through this, that, and the next thing, and this, that, and you have these standards to reach before you go and do your training. So that's what we did. And, because I was training so hard and so heavy, my body it could not adapt fast enough. So it would stiffen up to keep me from moving into those ranges of motion. It was a protective mechanism. And I was dumb enough to override those protective mechanisms. I mean, it's a great learning experience, hindsight being 2020, 18 years later. And, it was a great learning experience as early as 2010, 2011. Right.
But I'm sure probably in that time, you're probably still getting really strong in that time. So you're like, well, one modality is probably working, right?
I was getting strong until I wasn't. Right. So what happened was it was great. I was scheduled to hit a national qualifying event in Olympic lifting. I was weighing 105 kilos, which is about 231 pounds. I was filling out my weight class and I was really strong. I was probably as strong at that point as I'd been in 10 years. And I just power cleaned 308 for 16 singles on the minute. and I was feeling awesome. And so it's like, okay, time to get under the bar. So I stripped the weight down, put 100 kilos on, which was, I mean, I was warm, and I pulled myself underneath the weight into a squat clean and felt like somebody stabbed me in the front of the right hip with a screwdriver. And that pain, and of course, being a knucklehead and a meathead or whatever you want to call it, I was like, okay, well, I'll just go stretch that out and do it again. Right. So flexibility work, went over, must be tight hip flexors. My hip flexor must have spasmed. So I went over to my fancy dancy true stretch cage, my 3-dimensional multiplanar stretch cage, stretched out my hip flexor, went over, did another clean, same sensation, right? Stretched out again, stripped weight off the bar, right? Same thing, stretched again. I must not have gotten my hip flexor stretched in all 3 dimensions, all 3 planes of motion. I'll rest up, take it easy, come back tomorrow, do it again or whatever, right? A couple of days later. Well, that was the beginning of the end. So that's when my strength went. That was kind of the peak. And then I had never, up until that point, after that point, I never hit those types of numbers again. Yeah. Right. So it was downhill from there.
Yeah. Just the total load that you were just putting on your body was just the straw that broke the camel's back, really, at that time?
That's a difficult question to answer. Yeah. I mean, it's not difficult, but it's sticky.
Yeah.
I was using a spinal stabilization strategy that failed me. Okay. Because I was not able to maintain the spinal stabilization in the hole. Right. And so there was no spinal stability. And so we had internal rotation of the femur and pinched that labrum.
Yeah. Oh, man. I know. Those things are always, and they always seem like they come at those times, right? You just crushed out like a monster workout with way more weight, then you drop it down, and then all of a sudden just one false movement in there, from something, and it just goes. So
yeah, well, the ironic thing was I did the left one 10 months later. Is that right? 9 months later, on a warm-up with overhead squats.
Yeah.
So there's the thing, right? Like the body you can only get so strong. You've got to have the mobility / stability / motor control, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Right. In order to coax the amount of strength out of your body. So sometimes, like you said, in your case, you find you just get the warm up going and you work on your strength and that stuff sticks. But for me, not the case. Right. Yeah. And that's because I had some previous injuries I was bringing in. I had abdominal surgery and a lower back injury and a abdominal injury. I tore my oblique, probably 5 years previous, never fully recovered. So
I remember a buddy of mine who was a powerlifting champion. He was at my old gym. He said the worst injury he ever got was unloading plates from the bar, where just like 145 just kind of turned it, kind of just throwing it to the side after doing a 600, plus deadlift, doing singles and stuff like that. I mean, he was strong as an ox, but just the wrong movement at the wrong time when the body's in that just vulnerable position right there. And then it just comes. So, well, on the flip side, I wanted to ask you about, so that's things that thought were important, not as important. Was there anything that, if you think back, that you didn't deem as important, that you realized down the line that, no, this actually trumps a lot of things that I was putting ahead of it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's my basic philosophy now that I'm over 40 is based on this. And I guess I had, trying to remember when this was. It was probably 96, 97. I had a mentor, a coaching mentor, my weightlifting coach, Alfonso Duran. And he was a brilliant man. He was a Cuban emigre. He was kicked out of Cuba by Castro. I think it was the Mariana boat lift. I think that's what it was called when Castro opened all the jails and released all the criminals, right, and sent them to Miami. Yep. Well, he was one of those guys. But he was on the Cuban pre-select Olympic lifting team. And that was the team that was chosen to travel to compete internationally, but hadn't yet traveled. And the reason he wasn't allowed to travel is because he refused to become a member of the Communist Party, right? So long story long, he ended up in America. He has a master of sport, or he had a master in sport. They didn't take it away from Alfonso's past. So, and so he was trained by probably one of the greatest Soviet coaches, weightlifting coaches of all time, Alexei Medvedev, who's a world champion and who was the Olympic team coach, right? The national team coach.
Yep.
And so I was fortunate enough to train and be mentored by him. And I would bring him all kinds of Soviet material, right? And he just said to me one day, because I think I had finished my postgraduate work and I was working full time. So I'd either go up to New York City. I was living in New Jersey at the time. I'd get up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, catch a train, go in, train people all day, come home. Or I'd split my time between New York City and one of the local gyms. And he said, what you read in these yearbooks, he's like, this is for qualified athletes, right? This is not for normal people. He said, you can't take this stuff verbatim, right, and emulate it in the real world. I was like, what are you talking about? Don't you know who I am? I'm a hard worker. Like I'll do whatever it takes. He says, no, you don't understand. He's like, these guys had their entire lives controlled for them, right? When he was on the Cuban weightlifting team, he would train 3 to 4 hours a day, go home the rest of the day, right? And at the end of at the end of every month, so every 30 days, he'd go down to the manufacturing plant for which he supposedly worked, and he picked up a paycheck, right? And every month, at the end of the month, he also got a penicillin shot, right? And he always joked, he said, yeah, but I'm not sick. And they go, yeah, see, it's working. Right? But it wasn't penicillin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's restorative is the word, right?
Restoratives. That's right. They were active restoratives. And so he had that.
Vitamin S, I believe.
Vitamin S, as we call it today.
Fill in the blanks, everybody. Yeah.
Right? So he said these training protocols are based on that lifestyle. They're not designed for the man or woman, and in my case it was man, right, who is married, has 2.5 kids, works 40 hours a week, or at least he gets paid for 40 hours a week and has to work 60 to 80 to 100, depending on the industry in which you work, right, has a mortgage or mortgages and car payments, right? It's the external stressors are the load, right? And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm superhuman. I defy the laws of physiology. And so that's where all my injuries came from, was ignoring that. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I learned, that I discounted at first. And I think many people discount that, right? They're still trying to use programming designed for athletes by former athletes, who are in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, right? It's incredibly challenging to do. And it can be done if you're independently wealthy and you have restoratives, right? Yeah. Not saying it can't be, but that's the context. And so for everybody else, training has to be written, right, around those circumstances.
Yeah, that's such a great line. External stressors are the load. And, what is it? I think is it the term, the allostolic load? It's like the combined load of everything that's going on in your life. And
I believe so.
And it's hard because we often don't take into account the stresses of everyday life that's going on. If you have 2.5 kids and they are a handful in that day, that's like sets on your body that you're doing, but you can't quantify it. It's not an objective thing of, oh, I did that in there. So often we just kind of put that to the side. And I wonder, do you think that it's probably a combination of some, do you think it's a little bit more though, that specifically as guys, we have this mindset of like, well, we're just going to push through everything. It's this no pain, no gain. Like if they can do it, that's what I need to do. Yeah. Or is it more of like an ignorance to that stress that is added into our body of all like life obligations that we have, and we don't account for that?
Well, again, like I said earlier, it's not a either or, right? It's a both, or an and to both, right? So yes, we pride ourselves in being hard workers, or at least most of us do, right? And we're just going to figure out a way to get it done. And that works in many circumstances, but it also has a cost in those circumstances, and the cost is on the rest of your life. So whether it's work or training, if you're going to work, let's just say you're Joe White Collar, okay, and you're being paid for 40 hours a week, and you got the bennies and the stock options, right? But it's an unwritten rule that you will be at work until the work gets done. How many hours of work are you doing that week?
Until it's done.
Right?
Yeah.
Until it's done. Yeah. I mean, my brother-in-law works in Silicon Valley, and I don't know how many startups he's been a part of, and he's a couple years older than me. And like I said, I'm over 40, and it's not uncommon, right, to hear of him working 90, 100, 110-hour work weeks, right? So what does that do to your body as a stressor? And how does that affect your training program, right? The answer is it's a huge stressor, right? Especially if you don't show up, they're going to pay somebody. They'll figure out a way to get rid of you, right, for non-performance, and they'll bring somebody younger with more energy. They can pay less to do your job, right? So your entire livelihood is riding on that, and so is your family's livelihood, right? You're responsible for your family. This is a huge stressor, and a lot of guys don't account for it because, well, that's what everybody does, but it doesn't make it go away, right? Now flip that and do a traditional bodybuilding program, right? How much energy do you have left for work?
Barely have any for the workout.
Yeah, I mean, you get done with your workout, you're smoked,
Yeah.
right? You got to go lie in a corner in the fetal position, right? And then the next 3 days you're sore. You can't comb your hair, you can't sit down, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So how much effort do you put into work? So, it's two different sides of the same coin. It's still load.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting. I haven't thought of this in a while. I used to train two sisters that were both in the nursing business, and they had their set schedules, but every once in a while, usually like every couple of weeks, they were on call and they had a beeper on there. And you would start to see that the workouts that they would come in and do when they were on call were very different. You could see it in the body language. You can see it just in the stress. They were checking, and they were in a, very busy, stressful environment all the time. So always wondering if it was getting out, and you could physically see the strength difference that they had on those days versus others.
Yeah. And so those are perfect days to max out and do 90% for 4 sets of 4, those types of things, right?
100%.
100%.
Yeah.
100% every time, all the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe a little more mobility on that day.
Yeah, that's right. But we're just not trained to see that. Like, that's just not part of the equation. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that was the thing that I ignored probably until my late 30s. Right. I'm still trying to train. I was lying on the floor of, where are you? You're in Pennsylvania, right?
New York. Yeah.
New York. Okay. So close to you. I was lying on the floor of a gym in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, September 2010. It was the second weekend I traveled there. The first weekend was for an RKC1, and the second weekend was for an easy strength event. And I had just visited Alfonso, and I was training super hard. I was trying to get back into weightlifting. All the numbers are lining up, right? I had just hit magic number, 90%, got on a plane, flew down there, right? Drove up from Pennsylvania, from Philly airport up to West New York, New Jersey, which is about 2.5 hours. And I reached over to get the map, and I felt a little pop in my back. I was like, that's weird. What's that about? That's probably just, plane ride, whatever. Driving, reading the map, my back starts getting sore. Started getting like the creeping soreness across the belt line. I'm like, oh God, that's not good. So I'm driving about an hour in. I'm getting that soreness and the tingling running down the leg. I'm like, oh man, I screwed myself. Right. And then I'm lying on the floor. So that was Thursday. So Friday, I'm lying on the floor, and I got to go present for Marty Gallagher, like different variations of the squat. I can't move. Right. And here I am, a master RKC, and all my RKC buddies are there. Yeah. Right. And so in that moment, I had like one of those come to Jesus moments. My wife's 3 months pregnant with her first child. And that's when I decided I got to stop training like an idiot and like a 17-year-old and train like an adult. Right. Like Alfonso was right. Right. This stuff really does matter. Right. You can't hide from it. And like, I, of all people, should know better, because I had spent the previous 4 years trying to rehab myself from my injuries. And here I am injured again, right, falling into the same trap. Right.
Yeah. I know it's tough, because hitting 90% is really fun. It's like, I know it's an easy thing to say. I remember like Fabio's talked to me about this before, where like when he teaches at events, he counts all of the reps that he demonstrates when he does work, because because like he's a wizard with numbers of everything with programming. But when he talked about that and told me about that, like everything is a stressor on the body. And I used to think of that too, of like, how many times as coaches are you demonstrating throughout the day? Then you're going and getting your workout in. And because as you were talking there, I had a similar thing. I crushed a workout out and then drove 3 hours to a event and felt that belt line at the back and then it started running down, and I spent a whole weekend at an event, pretty much could barely move. And I'm supposed to be the leader of a team, and I'm hobbling around, like introducing myself to big name people I would love to actually be able to posture up and have a conversation with. So it's
so I'm not unique, right?
No, right. Like, I mean, we all learn from these things, but as you mentioned, like you learned this like at 30, you probably saw this coming on with people, but then it really took you until like in your 30s. So some time down the line before you really started addressing it from there. Beforehand, were you not aware of it as much, or was it not sure how to really change this or adjust programming at that time?
Well, I think I was always aware of it with my clients, right? Like the client model is first do no harm, right? It's not about performance. It's about keeping them safe and injury free and allowing them to perform in that environment. So that was never wasted on me with my clients, but it was always wasted on me in my training, right? So I think just to give you some perspective, I guess it was probably about 2001, I had a peak week of client training where I was training 75 hours of one-on-one training, right? And then my average client load from 2001 to 2000 and I want to say 7 was about 60 to 65 hours of one-on-one training a week. So
that's a week. Yeah.
That's a week, man. We never had any injuries, right? From my clients doing that. So the client training was always different from my training because I'm special, like the rules of physiology don't apply to me. Obviously,
I know, right?
It is Superman.
I know it is it is a weird thing of doing it. Like we can do it for clients, or you can listen to a coach and getting in. I mean, I've worked with Brett for years now, because I know that I will do something stupid myself in there and add more and more to it. And it's hard because when you're feeling good and you're feeling strong and you're making progress, then it's a natural thing in our mind. Like, well, if this is good, then more must be better. And I think regardless of how much experience or how much knowledge you have, it's still something that you need to check yourself on. And it's always interesting because it's funny. Every time I get a chance to talk to you, I always have one client that is in a complex program right now, which is always like, and both a blessing and a curse of doing those programs. But sometimes these complex, it's 10 minutes a day. It's 15 minutes a day. It's really in the grand scheme of how much you train, and that you're doing a lot in that short period of time, but it's still 10 minutes a day from there. It is almost the hardest part of that. I mean, getting through it is one thing, but almost one of the hardest part is just the mindset of only doing 10, 15 minutes a day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the week 1 of light day kettlebell muscle is 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, what else can I do? Rest, go enjoy your life, right? Like, sleep more, right? It's definitely takes a big reframing, and that's because, a lot of us guys and women, right? My wife is one of them. She was a college scholarship athlete. You practiced what, 2.5, 3.5, 4 hours a day, right? That's in season. Off season was more. Right. And wrestling for me, college was 3 hours of practice.
Yeah.
Right. That's not including strength training.
Yeah.
Which was high intensity training, right? Which was Arthur Jones's hit. So everything was done to failure, all out, all as hard as you can go, and then some. Right. Which I think I did like 3 of those workouts, and I was like, this is stupid. I'm done.
And a wrestling practice alone is
right. Yeah. I'm already smoked. You're going to try and crush me even more. Like I'm already exhausted.
Yeah.
Right? Let's just.
I came from an old school high school. Joe Bennett, God rest him, is an amazing high school wrestling coach, and I worked with an internship with the athletic training, and we worked the wrestling room. And the first thing we walked in there and realized this room's about 110 degrees right now because they cranked up the heat in there because you got to sweat it out because everybody's got to make weight, and then you go and lift afterwards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're gonna have to reel me back in. I forgot.
Yeah, it's the frame. It's a big reframing of
the big reframe, right?
Of the time.
So we've got this background, and my wife, she was volleyball at Rutgers, and their off season was 3 practices. Preseason, So I was their strength coach. So preseason, you'd have a morning session, an afternoon session, and an evening session. Each one of those sessions were 2 to 3 hours. Right. So there's your background and context for training. And then I'm going to tell you, oh, you only need 20 minutes 3 times a week. You're like, there's just,
Yeah.
There's a blank stare, right? And the EKG machine goes, boo,
Yeah.
right? And the cell phone, like, right, the number you dialed has been disconnected. Like, there's just, it's just so, what's the right word? Absurd. You know what I mean? It's absurd. You're like, how? This is my background. How am I going to get what I think I'm supposed to get when I was at peak shape? Right. And there's another thing we'll talk about here in a second. When I was at peak shape, how am I supposed to only train for 20 to 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, and get in that kind of shape?
Yeah.
Right. And the answer is you're not. Right. You're not. That's that allostatic load you're referring to. We've got to take into consideration all this other stuff. And you have to take into consideration that you're not the same person you were 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. Right. Your body can't absorb that kind of damage, can't absorb that kind of load. It's already absorbing most of it from your environmental stressors. Right. And so you got to be very careful what you ask it to do unless you want to break something.
That's the tough answer that nobody wants oftentimes is, well, how do you get in peak shape? Well, peak is going to be different. It's like when I talked with Alex Salkin recently on here, and he had a great example of the optimal versus practical. And it's like, it's so much time. We always love that word optimal. Like, what's the optimal way to do it? Well, oftentimes you first need to know what's practical for it. Right. And I think it's a hard thing, even myself, because I would consider myself a high performer. I have a lot of energy. I try and get a lot done throughout the day in there. So to reel back a little bit still is, a little bit of that. Can I still do more? Can I get more done? Can I get this in? It took me until really just a few years ago when I got into iron cardio work with Brett and intuitive training, when I was building a business from scratch and I needed all my mental faculties each day to know which direction I was going, where some days I was training for 10, 15 minutes and realized a month or two in, I was still gaining strength. I was still feeling really good, really pliable in here. I was like, wow, I'm training less than I did before and actually feeling better.
Yeah, that's common, right? Like I have 2 clients, one I can, especially I'm thinking of right now. And I've got him training 4 days a week because that's what he enjoys, right? And that's what he can tolerate. And routinely, probably about every 3 to 4 months, he asks me, what else can we do? I'm feeling really good. I have lots of energy. And my response is, yeah, isn't that what you want? Right? Like, don't you want to feel really good and have lots of energy? And he goes, oh, yeah, I do. I guess, that doesn't really make any sense, right? So because the common approach is based on our background, beat yourself down. Right. So you can feel good about having a great workout. Forget about the energy that it gives you moving forward. It's all about surviving the beatdown, having a great workout. And we don't think about it in terms of energy for the life that we've prepared for ourselves. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and this is because I think almost every guy I've ever talked to, at least who was an athlete, has a vision of himself of being 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 23, somewhere in that zone, right? So he still views himself as that person. And he looks in the mirror and he goes, where'd that gray hair come from? What's that wrinkle there, right? You know what I mean? And so there's this giant disconnect between what he thinks he should do based on what he did in the past versus what he can actually do now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it goes back into the comparison aspect.
The comparison thing. Yeah, we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, and there can be history comparison. I heard this the other day. I never thought of it this way. The comedian Jimmy Carr said with social media, everybody's got a take on social media and compulsion and addiction. And he said, the one thing we don't talk about is we're more connected to our past than ever before. It's like we used to have photo albums, or you had like, maybe you got your picture in the paper and that was when you saw things in the past. But now Facebook will pop up a memory of you over and over again. Yeah. So you're constantly looking back at your past of what you were before. And it's hard to put yourself in the present or even going towards the future because social media, what it does is it always reminds you of the past, of where you've been before.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And I never thought of it that way, of how that keeps us into, well, are we comparing ourselves or what we did before or how we felt before, and not saying, well, this is what I can do now. I can actually optimize where I am right now, because you're always looking at things that were going in the past. And I was like, shit, I have that all the time, because I've used social media for business and posting a lot. And I think things pop up all the time. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that day. I remember how I felt then.
Yeah.
Naturally, you're like, well, how do I feel now? Do I feel the same? Do I feel better? It's just a natural comparison that starts coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also too is we assume that because we did it in the past, that's the best way. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, that's the best way.
Yeah.
Like, no, that was the best way for you then, right? Which would you prefer? Would you prefer, an automobile or a horse and carriage? Right? That's the past, the good old days. You know what I mean? How about we just get that carriage house put together, and we have some hay, and you can go muck out the stalls, right?
Exactly.
And you can go feed your horse, right? I mean, the good old days.
Yep. And build a fire and
build a fire,
and the outhouse,
right.
and all that good stuff. Right.
The outhouse. We don't need this Zoom stuff. We'll just, we'll go by courier pigeon or Pony Express. The good old days, right?
Yeah.
That's the way we used to do it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Like we're stuck there, and we assume that there have been no advances, right? And that it's funny because we say things like, we love change. Change is good, right? Like people smoke that opium pipe every 8 to 12 years in the political arena, right? Change. But the reality is, as a species, we're really resistant to change. That's the way I've always done it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Give me one good reason why I should change. I don't know. What you're doing now isn't working for you? I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of the most dangerous cliches, is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's like, it's depending on there's things that evolve, and we, build. And sometimes that evolution is learning more about something that's simple, rather than just something brand new. And that's what I found so fascinating, especially with work of like things like complexes, like especially double bell work, things like that, where you think that like to do a program like recomp or like to shed fat and get stronger, and that, well, I want to do more things. I want to get to a next level, which means I need to do more shit. Mm-hmm. When in reality, it's probably more eliminate a lot of the stuff that you're doing that doesn't serve you, so you can allow the things that give you the most bang for your buck the opportunity to flourish as much as possible.
Yeah, that's right. Or instead of doing more on the exercise front, take care of all the stuff behind the scenes that you're not doing, right? Like, here's a novel idea. Instead of sitting in bed, scrolling through your tablet on Facebook or the gram or whatever, right? You know that you should be in bed at 10:30, and you lie to yourself by saying you are in bed, but you're not turning that device off until 11:30 or 12, and then the alarm goes off at 5. How about you just turn that thing off at 8 and don't pick it up until it's time to go to work, right? Like, what would that do for you?
Yeah, it's those things, on that front too. It's, we used to do this thing in our studio that I loved. We had it was kind of like a challenge every 6 months that we would do, where we had different tests that people could go in. There was snatch tests. There was kind of like a Sinister type base one, but we had different levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there was different weights for what you use for different ones. And a common question we got is, well, how do I know what level I can do, or how long do I need to train for this level? So I kind of broke it down as like, level 1 is one of those where, if you just come in and train, you don't do anything else, just come in a couple of days or a few days a week, in a few months, you'll be able to do a level 1 test. Like, their weights are that point. Level 2 is probably just takes a little bit more time. If you have more natural strength and ability in you coming in, you could probably get to a level 2. But level 3 and level 4 is training isn't enough anymore. Like, just coming in and doing this isn't work. Now you need to look at your nutrition. You need to look at your sleep. Maybe you need to manage your stress level, maybe meditation and visualization. If you want to go in and do something like Sinister, or, a beast tamer, or like something big, like, yeah, you might need to add more things into your day that make priority for you. So that's a choice that you need to make. It's not something you have to do, but if you want to get to a level like that, right, it's going to take more than just you do at the beginning. And I think we still, as just people, we lump it all into one thing. Like, oh, like, I want to get in the best shape, so I have to do all these things right now. When in reality, maybe the best thing that you can do is just train 3 days a week for 10 minutes is great. Once you
Get
do that,
started.
just add a little bit more from there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always say there's 3 questions you have to ask yourself, right? What do I want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What can I do? So I want to be Mr. Olympia. Okay. What can you do? Can you train 6 days a week, get your hands on steroids, sleep 9 to 10 hours a day, right? And have all these other recovery measures available to you, right? Get some sponsorships, that sort of thing. If you have a family, you're probably going to have to ignore them, right? Are you willing to do those things? No. Right. So then what can you actually do? Well, I can train 3 days a week, probably. Okay. So that's what you want, right? And that's what you can do. So what are you actually willing to do? Are you actually willing to go to the gym 3 days a week and train like a bodybuilder? No. Right. So it's just like you were saying, right? It's like it's a spectrum, right? And a lot of people overestimate what they want to do versus what they're willing to do. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100. Well, we see the results of people, right? It's like you see somebody and like, oh, I want to get that result, but then you don't see the trail of everything that it takes in order, to get there. It's like everybody talks about the $1 billion mindset. It's like, how big a number a billion is in there. It's like, I mean, the things you need to do of doing that for such a long period of time. It's like, I mean, it's very easy to idolize. I mean, we see training montages in movies all the time, and you could watch Creed and you can watch Rocky a million times and it looks awesome. I want to do that, but you're doing it in the comfort of your own chair while you're eating popcorn and having a diet soda.
That's not real.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, this was always my take, Geoff, on, I think meditation and mindset practice is very powerful, but if you don't connect it with a physical practice, then, because for me, like sitting in a really comfy room on a chair, like, and meditating about overcoming challenge is kind of a weird thing because I'm not overcoming any challenge at that time. It's like, you can visualize that, you can like do some breathing. And I think there's merit in that. I mean, there's science behind it, but I think one of the better things to do is take that mindset practice or a thought into training. That's why I've told people, like, take a day and train with no music, like go like by yourself with no external added dopamine, release on you. Just like focus on you and the bell, focus on you and the weight, and see how focused you can be at that time. You might get more out of it. You might actually feel more mental resilience at that time.
Yeah, 100% agree. Right. It's the difference between talking and doing. Right.
Yeah.
So mental, physical. Eventually, it's got to transfer out of here and get into the real world.
Yeah.
Right.
No, perfect.
So esports versus real sports.
And no doubt. I got one more thing I wanted to ask you about, Geoff, with our time, is because you've done such a great job of programming in your time, from the work that you've done with Kettlebell Burn, with Kettlebell Muscle, with the Giant and stuff. When you work on building a program of something, what is the process like that you go through? Are there specific questions that you ask yourself of like, these are the things that I need to answer? What is that process like?
That's a really good question. I'll do the best I can to answer it, because at this point in my career, it's intuitive.
Flows. Yeah.
Right. It just flows. If you ask me to break it down, basically it's always outcome based. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? Right. And then I reverse it from there. Like, how much time am I willing to put in? How much time does the trainee have? What exercises are available to them? What exercises have they done? In the case of kettlebells, in the early days of the kettlebell, it was, what kettlebells do you have available to you? Right. And now that's not even a question to answer. Like, my assumption is you're going to go figure out how to find a bell or a pair of bells that meets the standard, right? The starting standard, like a 10 RM. Oh, you don't have a 10 RM? Well, go find it. Right. So little different mindset, but basically it's, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Right. And then I back it out from there. Begin with the end in mind, right? Or reverse planning, or however you want to say it. Right.
Yeah. It's perfect. I mean, it's so powerful to learn, because I see a lot of people now, a lot of coaches, and it's like, we're trying to put out programs. Everybody's trying to do their best to get it out. But I see a lot of different things out there with like demanding a certain amount of time and a certain amount of days. Like, this is what you need to do. When I love what you just said there, like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Yeah. I think that it's such a powerful and such like simple question to ask, yet we so often don't ask it in things that we're doing because we want to just get into action. We want to just get into things. When if you actually stop and say, okay, what am I actually trying to solve? That's probably going to be a good starting point.
Yep.
Yeah. So Geoff, I really appreciate it again of you jumping on. I always love talking with you. I love learning from you. So thank you so much for jumping on. It's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Our hour's up already. I feel like we just got started.
I know, right? So. It goes really quick. And a lot of times. I know you got a lot that you're working on with everything. What's the best place that people can go and check out everything that you're doing?
Just go to my website, chasingstrength.com. You should be able to find your way around there and pretty much get anything that you want to find out about, right? Anything you want to know will be found on that website primarily.
Perfect. Yeah. So, and I'll plug it again because I did it at the beginning, but Geoff's YouTube channel, absolutely awesome. If you love this stuff, if you love digging into programming and everything here, then go check that out too. Geoff, brother, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you. I'll check you guys on the next one.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.